Welcome to WTEW Bible Studies. We're now at John chapter 18. We've just finished with Jesus talking about he's going to die and he wants to make sure that his disciples know that it's going to be all right. He's going to send the Holy Spirit. They're not going to be orphans. There's going to be a relationship. That relationship's going to last forever. That's what God wants for all of us. We don't all choose that, but that's what God wants. That brings us to chapter 18. From here on, we're going to hear about all the bad things that are going to happen to Jesus. But no matter what happens, he's going to come back to life. Not even death can hold him. So, chapter 18, verse 1 of the book of John. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Cedron, where there was a garden, into which he entered and his disciples. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus ofttimes resorted thither with his disciples. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So they had their Passover meal, all the disciples, the 12 of them together, and Judas went out to the chief priests, and he went there to tell them where Jesus was going to be. So this brook Cedron, that's Kidron Valley. So if you look at those pictures from the Mount of Olives and you see that golden dome in between there, down in the valley, there's a garden on the one side, the same side as the Mount of Olives. That's there till this day. And apparently Jesus liked to hang out there. It's just real close to Jerusalem. You just have to walk up the hill from there, and you're at the temple. And that's where all this is taking place. So Jesus is there with 11 of his disciples, and then Judas knew where he was going to be. And Judas came with the chief priests and Pharisees. And this is nighttime. There's lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus hasn't slept. He's had this last meal with his disciples. He was out praying. Now Judas is coming to betray him. He brings us to verse 4. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, Whom seek ye? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said unto them, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. As soon then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. So all these people are coming to arrest Jesus, and he just has to say that I am. And I am is the eternal God. When Abraham spoke to God in the burning bush, he said, Who should I say sent me? Tell me the I am, the eternal God, sent you. So when Jesus says, I am, just those words knocked this whole garrison over. So they came to arrest him, and with a word, Jesus could repel them. But that's not what he came to do. He came to die for us. So they got back up, and he was led in their hands. Starting with verse 7 then. Then asked he them again, Whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore ye seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Of them which thou gavest me, I have lost none. There's a prophecy that Jesus was going to keep his disciples. There was going to be one that would betray him, but the rest of them he would keep. And Jesus is fulfilling that word now, and he's pleading for the life of his followers. And they didn't really have a choice in that. Jesus could have knocked them over again if they made the wrong choice. But Simon Peter, he's going to get involved, of course, starting in verse 10. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus unto Peter, Put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father has given me, shall I not drink it? Then the band and the captain and officers of the Jews took Jesus and bound him, and led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest in that same year. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews, that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. So Simon Peter, he's willing to die for Jesus at this point, and he's outnumbered. He's a fisherman. He's not a swordsman, so my guess is he's not trying to cut off the ear. He's probably trying to kill this guy. He's just not a very good shot, probably not having to use that before. He struck out. He doesn't know it's Jesus' plan to die. Jesus told him that's what's going to happen. It's time for me to drink the cup that the Father poured out. It means it's time to take on the sins of the world. That was Jesus' cup. So the band that came took him and bound Jesus and led him away. And where did he go? Well, Annas he was the father-in-law to Caiaphas. Apparently, he was the guy that decided who was going to be high priest and who wasn't. So he had a lot of clout back in those days. That was where the first place that they took Jesus and they were going to try him. And it was illegal for them to try Jesus at night, but that's exactly what they're going to do. And mentions Caiaphas also. Caiaphas was the high priest. Caiaphas is going to be involved with this whole illegal trial of Jesus in the middle of the night. And Caiaphas was the one, because he was the high priest, God actually spoke through him and said it's expedient that one man should die. And that's exactly what Jesus came to do. That was his cup. Verse 15, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Then saith the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, Art not thou also one of this man's disciples? He said, I am not. And the servants and officers stood there, who had made a fire of coals, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them, and warmed himself. Simon Peter, he's a man that was always doing something right out in front, good or bad. Simon Peter was a leader, and he was wanting to follow Jesus. He wanted to fight and die with Jesus right there when they came to get him. And now he's following Jesus into where Annas was, and there was another disciple with him, and we're not told who he was. And there's really two choices. So first of all, Judas. We just read that he knew who the high priest was. He was there making a deal and betraying Jesus. But this is actually John, I believe. John never talks about himself directly. He just is an unnamed disciple in his own book. And Jesus and Peter, we're going to see later on that they're kind of running around together. I believe it's John that's with him here. So John apparently knows these people as well, and John's just going to do whatever there is. He's going to go through it. If they put him to death, so be it. If they put Jesus to death, well, he's going to be there with Jesus. He loved Jesus. He's the one that knew love. So that's why we had all those chapters in John talking about love and being one with the Father, abiding with him, and being willing to give up your life for another, even without a fight. So Peter was willing to go down with the fight, but he wasn't going to go down without one. And we're all different. We have different personalities, and God knows us, and he'll use us whatever personality we have. So Peter is there. Apparently John lets him in. He says, hey Peter, come on in. First he was out the door, but John came and got him. I believe it's John. And then somebody there, one of the ladies, says, hey, aren't you one of his disciples? And Peter denies it. And then some other people were there, and hey Peter, maybe they don't know it's Peter, but he's warming himself at a fire with them. So it's cold out here this night, and Peter says again, no, I'm not one of his disciples. So suddenly that cowardice comes in, and you can speak bad things about Peter, but how many of us are willing to die for what we believe about Jesus? So that's the point that we're supposed to come to. And I've said it before, but John was the only one that didn't die a martyr's death, and he's the only one that was there willing to give his life for Jesus at that time. The other disciples, they all came to that point where they gave their lives. Verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. Why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Answerest thou the high priest so? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? Now Annas had sent him bound unto Caiaphas the high priest. So we went from Annas. Jesus has already made one transition. He went to see Annas, and we're not really told anything about that here in the book of John. But his second place, he's in front of the high priest now, which is Caiaphas. And Caiaphas is questioning him. He wants to bring charges against Jesus. He wants to put him to death. So he wants Jesus to testify against himself. And Jesus is not going to do that. He's not going to do any favors for Caiaphas. And one of the officers then struck Jesus, and he says, hey, why did you strike me? I haven't done anything bad. And Jesus is our high priest. He had power over Caiaphas, but he willingly laid down his life. He's playing his part. That brings us to verse 25, back to Simon Peter. And Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. They said therefore unto him, Art not thou also one of his disciples? He denied and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, said, Did not I see thee in the garden with him? Peter denied again, and immediately the cock crew. So Simon Peter's standing there saying, No, I'm not one of his disciples. He's afraid that he's going to get the same treatment and be bound with Jesus the same way he is, and he didn't want any part of that. He's living in the flesh there. So in order to avoid this, we have to constantly keep our eyes on Jesus. He was turning away from Jesus at this time. And when the cock crows, it's morning. That's why the cock crows. He didn't do it just because Jesus had denied him. He did it because it was morning time. But Jesus said that he would deny him before the cock crew. Verse 28, Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. And it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring ye against this man? They answered and said unto him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto thee. Then said Pilate unto them, Take ye him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. Jesus at his third trial now. The Jews questioned him with Annas, with Caiaphas, and now he's going in front of the Gentiles. So Pontius Pilate, the governor of the land at that time, that's where the hall of judgment is. Caiaphas wants Pilate to put Jesus to death, and he's in charge, and he gets all the other Jews on his side. And they don't want this competition for the people of the land. Jesus is making other followers, and they want all the people to follow them. They believe that they're in charge, and they believe that Jesus can't be the Messiah because the Messiah was coming to rule forever. And Jesus himself said that he was going to die, and they just didn't understand how their Messiah could die for them, and they don't understand that to this day. Pilate doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He says, you go ahead and judge him if that's what you want to do. He doesn't care what these Jews did amongst themselves as long as they're not causing trouble for the masses. But Caiaphas says, well, we want him dead, and it's not, we're not allowed to give out a death sentence. They were under Roman authority, and they weren't allowed to put anybody to death. If somebody was going to be put to death, it was going to be on the basis of Roman law. And Jesus said he was going to be lifted up. He was going to be put on that cross. And that was something prophesied way before crucifixion was even a thought. So you can find those in the Psalms, how Jesus was going to be put to death. You can find it in Isaiah. So he was going to be lifted up on that cross. Verse 33, Then Pilate entered in the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it of me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. So Pilate is going in and out of the judgment hall. He talks to Jesus, then he comes out and speaks to the Jews, and now he's going back in to talk to Jesus. And wanted to know, are you the king of the Jews? Because if he is the king of the Jews, then that would be a bad thing. If he's going up against Caesar, Jesus is the king of the Jews. He's the king of the whole world. But it wasn't time for him to be king of the world just yet. So he says, my kingdom's not of this world. Again, God's kingdom is separate from the kingdom of this world. This kingdom, this world is ruled by Satan. And Jesus says, if my world was here, then my servants would fight, just like Peter was willing to fight for him. Jesus has angels that could have come down and killed anybody. He could have done it himself. But that's not what he was there to do, because this world was not his kingdom. And so he's trying to say that, but he is the king of the Jews, and that's eventually when they do crucify him, they'll put the charge up there. And the Jews want him to say, no, he said that he was. But Pilate, when he wrote that, no, he is the king of the Jews. He actually believed that Jesus was the king of the Jews. It's just that the timing was off. Verse 37, Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou the king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end I was born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and said unto them, I find in him no fault at all. But you have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. So Pilate's asking him directly, Are you a king? And Jesus says, Well, I was born to be a king. Yeah, I came in the world to tell everybody that yes, I'm the king. He was trying to explain that his kingdom, his time had not yet come. He was the king of the whole universe. He's the creator of the universe. But this world was still under sin. And Jesus wanted to reconcile the world to himself. And so he came to die. And that's exactly what he's going through. And just like the disciples, Pilate didn't understand, but he didn't want to put Jesus to death. The Jews wanted him put to death. And this was, again, to fulfill prophecy. God chose the Jews to reveal himself to. Now he's going to reveal himself to the rest of the world. And this is a transition period where the Jews reject Jesus, so that now it's time for Jesus to be revealed through Gentiles. That doesn't mean that the Jews are cut off totally. There's still a remnant of Jews that are called Messianic Jews, and they believe in Jesus to this day. But they're still chosen by God to be his people. And in the kingdom to come that Jesus says, I'm the king of, he is going to rule the world. He's going to do it right from Jerusalem. So in order to get out of killing Jesus, he says, well, let me release somebody like we do every year at the Passover. So this is the Passover, the time that Jesus would die as the Passover lamb. He picks out just this foul man, this Barabbas. These high priests, they didn't want anything to do with Jesus. So I don't care what my choices are. We need to get Jesus killed. So if it means releasing Barabbas, then that's what's going to happen. And that's the choice that they made. And it's all that was prophesied is now going to be fulfilled. And that's the end of chapter 18. All the evil done against Jesus on his and all these Jews that are supposed to be so obedient to the law, disobeying the law, to have Jesus killed. We'll pick up next time with chapter 19.